William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Chris Kulak,
Present.
Linda Garner, Wendy Conrad, Mark Grace, Lewis Henry, Chase Hadley,
Present.
Oscar Castillo,
Present.
Ted Hamilton, Carol Mendelson,
Present.
Casey McManaman, Chad Cruz,
Present.
Ken Webb.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the roll call. And on that basis, I call the meeting to order. We have a full agenda today. We're going to have an update, an overview on the bridge from their top executives. And then Ms. Sharp is going to present the report of the Office of Homeless Solutions. And then we're going to have a discussion led by Commissioner Mendelson on some previous findings on community priorities and facilitate our own discussion about establishment of priorities. And then we'll have a couple of items to vote on toward the end of the meeting. So first order of business is the approval of the minutes of our last meeting, September 26th. Do I have a motion for approval? Moved. And a second? Moved and second. All in favor? Any opposed? Great. Minutes are approved. And let me welcome Ms. Garner, who's a new commissioner, new member of the commission, and this is our first meeting. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so next item on the agenda is a report by Dr. David Woody, the interim president and CEO, and Mr. Sam Merton, the chief operating officer of the bridge. And they're going to just give an overview of what the bridge is, what it does, and the services it provides. And then we'll have opportunity for questions from the commissioners if there are any. So, Dr. Woody.
Good afternoon. Again, thank you for the opportunity to offer you information about the bridge. Again, the Bridge Homeless Recovery Center is at 1818 Corsicana Street. And we have a PowerPoint. Hopefully you have a copy in front of you that kind of highlights some of the remarks I'd like to make about our services and the impact that we are hoping to have and continue to have on our community. Again, I've brought Sam Merton here, our Chief Operating Officer as well, and I may ask him to tune in as well. The first page, or page 2 of your document, basically describes the history of the bridge. How it is that it was to come about. It was not something that just fell out of the sky, but was a result of fairly significant collaboration, discussion, dialogue among community leaders about the issue of homelessness in this community. You see that there was a significant number of folks who needed shelter. There was, in addition, an expectation that if an increased and enhanced sheltering experience was to occur, that it should be a recovery-oriented system. How is it that we can get folks assessed, their needs addressed, and hopefully get them back to being positively, constructively contributors to our society and to our community. As a result of that, you see that voters approved a $3 million bond referendum to begin planning. And then in 2005, voters approved a $23.8 million bond in order to establish what is our current facility. The bridge has worked with the state of Texas, city of Dallas, Dallas County, to establish homeless housing and services recovery program and expanded related activities. 2011, the bridge which was originally part of Metropolitan Dallas Homeless Alliance, separated, became its own 501c3. And also in that year, the facility, given the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence. In 2014, this recovery-oriented system of care experience was one that the bridge was seen as being delivering in an exemplary way. We were acknowledged and affirmed in terms of that by the state of Texas. That year as well, our original entrance was on Park Street. We changed the entrance for our guests to now come into our facility on St. Paul Street. And along with that, we had funding to increase our capacity in our pavilion area. We did some AC work in an area where folks have respite during the day. And in the evening is the area where we sleep 150 of the 249 folks that we can offer night shelter on our campus. Okay. City of Dallas in 2015, I'd hope because of our good partnership at that time, extended its partnership formally with the bridge for an additional 5 years, and we're kind of in the middle of that experience as we speak. In 2016, we wanted to have an impact on the number of 911 calls that were coming to our facility. We initiated a partnership with Dallas Fire and Rescue, where now we have off-duty paramedics who provide on-site access to our guests who may need services. For a little bit of context, fire and rescue equipment would come to our facility. Often a paramedic would come onto campus, do an examination, decide through their triage experience that a person didn't need to be transported to a hospital, to Parkland, to Baylor. And for us, that we saw that as an extremely high usage of county dollars just to come and do an additional check, physical health check for somebody. And so we've seen a significant drop in the number of 911 calls for medical experiences on our campus. And it's also good to have EMTs on campus who are not just sitting in an office, but actually going out, engaging our guests with folks that say if it's 100 degrees outside, are folks hydrated? Are folks suffering perhaps from epilepsy? We've got folks who can come on now, do a quick assessment, and typically don't need to make that call for 911 services. In addition, we, over the last couple of years, have really tried to expand the partnership and the quality of partnerships that we have with folks in our neighborhood. And through those partnerships, we're able to offer both safety support around the exterior of their facilities, but also maintenance, doing refuse pickup, power washing their sidewalks, those kinds of things that obviously reflect our desire to be good neighbors in the neighborhood. Of course, we had memberships of the board, the Bridges leadership that were involved in the previous Dallas Commission on Homelessness. We are celebrating the number of folks that we would serve daily. Again, we're a 24/7 facility. We serve 3 meals a day, and to serve by that time over 4 million meals, there's tremendous impact on that. In addition, in 2016, we established, tried to fill a gap in terms of our service delivery by initiating a peer support services experience. Again, our peers are individuals who have had a minimum for us of a year of recovery from some specific kind of substance use issue, trauma-related concern, perhaps homelessness themselves. And what we see as a result of those possible relationships is that individuals can quickly begin to bond with those folks. And again, these are folks who have been successful, they completed a recovery experience, and they lend to those folks through telling their own stories how it is that they've made progress in their own lives. And folks have really, our guests have really responded extremely positively to that. Lastly, I guess on this page, we have talked about the fact that we are preparing folks to be good citizens in their community. And we have a program, Guest Giving Back, where on campus, folks assist us in terms of the management of the facility. But we expanded that in 2016 to also have groups of our guests and volunteers actually going out into Deep Ellum, into the Cedars, doing refuse pickup, helping to plant, those kinds of things, again, trying to exhibit to folks that we're really committed. And also our guests are committed to being good neighbors as well. On page 5, you see kind of a specific and hopefully clear kind of description of who we are. Often, again, I come from a social work background, and I know that in terms of my staff, if they don't have a clear sense of their role and their purpose, they're probably going to be lost. Again, the bridge represents the Dallas commitment to providing assistance and recovery services to most of its disadvantaged residents. Again, we're focused on recovery, number one, and number two, helping our guests identify where it is that they can live a more successful life. We want them to get housed, and that's often the clear focus for each guest that we would engage. Again, our folks are referred to as guests. You see in terms of the PowerPoint that we employed just over 100 folks. You see kind of the breakdown of our staff. The fact that we are committed to folks being paid a living wage. Again, folks need to know that we are the low barrier shelter in the community, okay? Everyone who needs to come in for services, our arms are open, okay? We have an intake and triage staff who tries to meet folks where they're at, an assessment, documentation of why it is that they believe they're in the experiences that they've had, and immediately trying to connect them with one of our care managers who actually goes down, further explores that assessment, tries to build a relationship, and then begin connecting folks to specific resources on our campus. Again, our campus is designed to be a one-stop shop, okay? We have partnerships with Parkland Hospital. They have a clinic on our campus. Metro Care Services, in order to deal with behavioral health and mental health services, they have a clinic on our campus. The Veterans Administration, they have an office and a caseworker on our campus. If I was to go on to the VA campus this one in South Dallas, I would be lost. And so to have a case manager who can assist folks with acquiring the benefits that they qualify for, that's an important additional resource on our campus. Workforce solutions, in terms of trying to acquire for our guests appropriate employment. How is it that they get ready for a job search? A computer lab in those folks' space. If folks need clothing, to help them to get that, to make a good and positive presentation in terms of getting a job. Again, that resource is right on our campus. We have a barbershop on our campus. There is a good, we have been able to track that and to see how it is that folks who have taken advantage of that service eventually become housed, okay, in terms of individual self-esteem. We have showers, restrooms, and again, lastly, we offer night shelter to at least 100 or 250 folks on our campus. In addition to our emergency shelter where we shelter 100 folks, we also have a transitional shelter that addresses the needs of about 25, 26 women and about 74, 75 men. These folks often have benefits in place. They may have employment that hopefully at least gives them minimum wage. We have those folks who have at least a solid referral for housing and or a DHA voucher, okay? And so in terms of our scope of services, one of the major challenges we have is the lack of affordable or permanent supportive housing in our community. And that in terms of trying to create and sustain a flow of folks coming in off the street and into their own housing, without that resource in our community, that really slows down the process through which we get folks back out into the community. Specifically, on page 6, you would see that about 66% of the guests that we encounter quickly are exiting homelessness, okay? These are folks who have had some catastrophic illness, some major budgetary constraint that's thrown them. They may have burned bridges with a family member. The support that they may have garnered from a religious institution has gone away, and thus they show up at 1818 Corsicana Street. Those are folks that, as a result of an intake process and a care management relationship, we can quickly connect them with resources and get them back into their own housing. About a third of our population has much more significant behavioral health or mental health issues, and we're there in prioritizing our night shelter, wrap our arms around those folks, understand what's going on, get them stable, and then prepared to manage their own housing. Page 7 describes, again, our collaborative network. We would not be able to be that one-stop shop without the collaborations that you see on this page. I mentioned earlier the significance of offering night shelter. The point-in-time count, I believe, described that end of last January, there were probably nearly 1,000 people who were without night shelter. Again, with the bridge only being able to offer night shelter to about 250, we know that there's several hundred other folks with whom we need to engage and try to find shelter with them. Folks need to know that, for example, with the Union Gospel Mission, they come onto our campus daily, do their own intake, and transport up to 400 guests to their facility. Okay? They return them to our facility the next morning, 5:30, 6:30, again, where those folks can take advantage of our day services facility and all the resources that you see there. Okay. Impact. You see on page 8 that through our collaboration with Dallas Police Department, we have some figures about the impact that the bridge has had in that district, about a 57% drop. Okay? Homeless stays. We have great relationships with both the community court situation and Dallas County criminal justice system, and again, our capacity to assist folks and offer the bridge and the resources that we have as an alternative to incarceration, that also has a tremendous impact to our guests in respect to the community. Again, healthcare costs. Our relationship with Dallas Fire and Rescue allows us to appropriately use the Parkland Health and Hospital System and MetroCare in terms of reducing the number of emergency room visits. Again, the 911 calls. It's one thing to talk about a reduction in 911 calls in terms of Dallas Fire and Rescue, but also in our relationship with Dallas Police Department as well, to have them come on board, to be actively engaged with our safety staff is also seen. We track monthly through our attendance at the farmers market meetings, community meetings every month, that too is steadily dropping. We are particularly sensitive in respect to the community to quality of life issues. Okay? So again, we have worked hard to overlap with our major neighbors, Heinz Nut, Millet, and use DDI, the Downtown Dallas Inc.'s Safety Patrol, their clean team. If we see a major issue, we can call those folks. They will come out and come alongside us in order to try to keep that neighborhood clean. We have spent a lot of time trying to see, in fact, what else is happening. If you go down today, they were tearing down the old Union Gospel Mission. It's in the middle of being demolished right now. I think that reflects the fact that there are developers who are coming into the area, transitioning it, bringing more income into the area, and we've got just some numbers there that we believe reflects kind of what is happening in terms of the increase in property values, and we believe that we are a part of why it is that those property values are increasing. In addition, we're a part of regular community meetings, events. We've got a description here of a brochure that we've provided for neighborhood residents in respect to how it is that folks can interact with panhandlers and direct them to the resources that we have on our campus. In addition, on the weekends in that area, there are a number of religious and other groups who will come to feed the homeless. We're actively engaging those folks. Again, we at the Bridge, we serve 3 meals a day, 24, every day of the week, every day of the year. And so to help them to refashion how it is that they may offer that kind of service and to come onto our campus and serve one of the 3 meals a day, that would be an awesome use of their support and time. On page 10, you see a description of our revenue over the last 3 years or so. Okay? What I would tell you is that, again, at the Bridge, we are initially focused on providing those basic safety and security needs for folks who would be homeless. A shower, a meal, the beginnings of hopefully a recovery effort. That $3.8 million, those dollars are really focused on our capacity to deliver that service to the community. Okay? we're very concerned often that someone would come and sit right outside of our entranceway, okay, rather than come inside to receive services. Folks will talk about folks who are services resistant, okay? We are not sitting back on our hands and just observing those folks. We are about trying to engage them and encourage them to at least build enough of a relationship or establish just enough trust with one of our professional staff to have them come inside and try to begin that recovery process. On page 11, you see how it is that our key outcomes have evolved over the last 2 to 3 years. Okay. Again, we're particularly concerned about the fact that we are not just providing shelter services, but are we coordinating, okay, for a guest their path away from homelessness. That path is typically in the form of a care and housing plan. Okay. And our care managers are involved in actually prioritizing the specific needs of each individual guest, what specific referrals need to be made, how is it that a warm handoff may be made for a guest who is otherwise would be reticent to make those connections and otherwise begin this process of recovery from homelessness. There's a description of about 2/3 of the page down of our guest giving back program. Again, that is trying to engage a couple thousand folks individually every year to make this connection, to go along with their housing. How is it that in the safety of the Bridges campus, to begin a look at how I can contribute to the community in this guest giving back experience? If we're kind of engendering that in folks on our campus, we're hopeful that that will continue when they return to the community. That often is critical in terms of folks not coming back and returning for services. At the very bottom, you see some large summaries in terms of the number of individuals served, the number of meals delivered. Again, I spoke about the significance of care management sessions, over 200,000 care management sessions. I mean, we believe that that is so critical in terms of a guest recovery from homelessness. There's been a lot of discussion about the HMIS system and the bridge, okay? We have kind of summarized kind of the process that we've been involved in terms of our obligation as a member of the continuum of care here in Dallas to be on board with the IRIS system, okay, which has been a very challenging one for us, okay? We have had confidence in Client Track over 7 years. We have used that database to be responsive to the needs of folks who have donated resources to us, to the city, to our contracts, okay? Our confidence in that is reflected in the organization's confidence in the numbers that we've shared with them about the impact. And so the challenge that we have had with IRIS is laid out there, and it's clear. During the months of June and July, in terms of us getting caught up, in terms of that obligation, since I've been in this interim position, we have actively pursued that. We got affirmation that we are caught up by all the parties involved. It's been an extremely tedious process. We brought on additional temps to help us to get caught up. We are planning about how it is that we will sustain that experience. Again, we understand the significance of that in terms of our obligations to show through metrics that we are achieving our goals. And so there may be additional questions later on about HMIS, but we are working hard at this point, and I would say under my leadership, to get there. So, on page 14, we have worked hard to not just stay in one place. Folks have described that the homeless population has become significantly more behaviorally challenged, many more folks with mental health issues and substance abuse issues, those co-occurring experiences. In addition, there have been significant challenges in terms of housing. And so we have applied for some resources through our Continuum of Care grant to hire a housing specialist to have that person on our campus. Okay? We have applied through a grant to the Meadows Foundation to acquire a Medicaid billing specialist, and our hope through that sort of experience is that we can offer more intensive clinical experiences to our guests counseling, and therapy, right on the campus. To have a care manager is often, that person can often be a guide in terms of connectedness to resources, but to be able to add on top of that a person who clinically can try to get involved with a guest who has significant behavioral health and mental health issues in terms of a talking thing is great. Okay, that they would have medication and that kind of thing to stabilize them. But for many guests to also be involved in an intensive clinical experience with a guest is only going to make them better in terms of the return to a housing experience. We have dipped our toe into, through the Emergency Solutions Grant, an investment in rapid rehousing. I think that would be an awesome experience where we are targeting resources to actually help quickly to get folks into housing. And that's going to mean our care managers actually going out with a guest to the community, advocating, okay, for folks with a landlord who may otherwise be reticent to engage a guest in terms of a housing experience that they may have. We are seeking and talking with a number of important constituents in the community about respite care. Again, folks who might end up at Parkland Hospital or at Baylor, have a surgical procedure or some other experience, and then need for a temporary period of time because they're homeless support through a nurse, through a physician who would kind of guide them through their physical health recovery process. And again, on our campus, we are extremely invested in how it is that we can try to quickly get folks into a reasonable and appropriate housing experience. On page 15, when we talk about affordable housing and supportive housing experience, I think it's important that you see that, again, we have a number of folks who have in their hands a housing voucher, okay? And through those stick figures at the bottom, exactly how many folks with a voucher can't get into their housing is an incredibly dramatic experience. Thus, our being both with our guests and also in the community talking about the need for more housing is really powerful. Okay. Lastly, just some descriptiveness in terms of the quality of expansion thinking that's going on within the organization. Again, we are part of Dallas County's Behavioral Health Housing Work Group. There's a listing there of folks who come to the table to talk about how it is we might increase housing in our community. And then at the bottom of page 16, there is three specific issues that folks are beginning to really dig into and take on in terms of what the options might be. So finally, I would say that the bridge is about collaboration and partnership, okay? For most guests, without a connectedness to other resources in the community, and we're talking about a warm connection with folks, we are not going to get folks through a recovery experience and hopefully into housing, okay? Our staff, truly focused on how it is that we have an impact on folks' lives, concerned about our community in many ways, and we are open to information, reactions, comments. How is it that we can get better? And hopefully throughout this presentation you see how it is that we've used both research that we've done on our work, but also feedback that we've got about our work in terms of how we can begin to expand services and deliver what it is that we would believe is helpful support to an individual who would come to us who would be homeless.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Woody, for that comprehensive overview of the bridge. A couple of quick questions from me, and then I'll ask the other commissioners. One is just an observation. We planned at a future meeting to have a presentation on the HMIS system from MDHA, the body that administers that, and so I think the bridge's experience with that is an important aspect of the discussion because you're one of the larger service providers and therefore have more dated input, but I would suggest that we not have a detailed discussion about HMIS today.
Right.
Because there are others that have experiences to share. And one quick question on slide 11, and I apologize if you mentioned this already, but the individuals provided shelter services, are those numbers there unduplicated individuals, and is it overnight shelter services, or does that include day services?
It includes day services as well, and that's unduplicated numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I think in the PowerPoint there's a description. We see between 750 and 1,000 folks every day. Okay. So hopefully that's a sense of the context in terms of impact that we're trying to have an impact on folks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering, are there guests there that are willing to rent rooms?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the new things that folks are, that rather than the folks that are finding their own individual, that we are beginning to look at, are there partnerships available? And one of the things that, especially on our women's side, often we have two women paired in our transitional shelter. So they've already begun a relationship, and that may be one that continues in the community. The same thing with our men in our transitional shelter on the second floor.
Okay, because I know an individual, and I've been trying to gather information, but I don't want it to have a conflict with me being here, but I want to see the homeless a solution of some sort. And he has houses. How do I get the partnership? If I'm just a catalyst, get the partnership for these people to leave the bridge and rent rooms. It's a suitable, decent amount, fair price.
Sure.
I've left many messages at the bridge. Before I even told you in here,
Okay.
I would give Christmas gift bags to the women at the bridge. I did last year. Our church, my pastors and I came in and gave gifts. I don't know if I met you or not. However, I have an abundance of rooms through this man that is trying to get out there and make a connection to help the homeless. And by, faith, it's my passion to see a solution for the homeless to get off the street, whether it be their own or renting a room to save money to get their own. So how do I make this
You can make the connection with me. Probably what we would do is have you again meet with our care managers, meet weekly on Thursdays at 1. Even if that person would like to come to the care management meeting, we could formalize a connectedness between our two mutual interests in order to try to address the needs of folks.
Wonderful.
It'd be fantastic.
Thank you.
This question may be for Barbara Martinez. On page 8 of your report, you talk about how the bridge has been collaborating to improve quality of life with neighbors, and you guys have been doing a great job of that. But we've still got this issue with TxDOT right away and the bridge, and you say here that the offer was declined by the city attorney's office. So, I just thought maybe, this may not be the venue to discuss this, but I just thought I would bring it up, because it is a big issue. Thank you.
And just to add a little more context, again, we've established relationships with our neighbors, and so we presented a potential plan where we would, overlap with Dallas Police Department and our safety folks, to kind of extend that same sort of experience on the bridge. Obviously, there are a lot of legal issues with that, but we're open to continue dialogue on that as an option. Okay? Again, those folks are so close to our front door. We are engaged with, in fact, of late, we've had a number of folks who are older and had to even engage Adult Protective Services in terms of trying to intervene with folks who are burning, basically expiring on the bridge from dehydration, et cetera, et cetera. So for us to have a quicker impact on that, if we can better target, we're fully open.
If I can provide a little information, of course I can't speak on behalf of the city attorney's office, but as it relates to the particular issue with TxDOT, we actually have an agreement with the state to be able to maintain those particular properties. And so we can't pass that we can't defer that agreement to another entity. I believe that the relationship that the bridge already has with the police department still allows them to be able to outreach and provide any services to individuals at TxDOT properties. The agreements that I believe you have in place now, the Good Neighbor Agreement, allows the bridge to be able to issue criminal trespassing affidavits. And so if the city is the one who already has the agreement with TxDOT, we wouldn't need the bridge to have the ability to put out criminal trespassing affidavit. We do that as the city. And so that's kind of the difference with this being public property versus private property.
Well, from the perception of people walking and driving by, the bridge is doing a great job of engaging all of the neighborhood properties, but the TxDOT right-of-way is a continual issue, and it's very ironic that the bridge can't help people on the bridge.
And they can't.
Well, it's not working, so we need to figure out how to make it work better.
Right, so that's actually, one point that I wanted to mention was that our next steps from here will be that we're working on the management agreement for 2017-18 to not only address different findings that have been identified, but also to strengthen the agreement so that it's consistent with the original agreement that was in place. So restate the original intent. And not that everything isn't being done, but the contract just hadn't reflected all of those provisions. So we're working very closely with the city attorney's office on that, but we also will strengthen language as it relates to good neighbor agreements. And Dr. Woody and I have had conversations on different opportunities for us to strengthen our relationships, making sure we're having monthly partnership meetings, and just looking at ways to address concerns that we know have been identified.
All right, and we've talked about having a presentation on the agreement with the bridge, but we haven't put it on here for today, so we defer that to future meeting.
Yes, so we will come back to you all for the November meeting. We want, again, because the city's response to homelessness overall, homelessness response has been, or is under audit by the city auditor's office, and we want to make sure that whatever corrective action is required ends up in the contracts. And so when we come back to you all, we will be able to discuss that, okay, as a result of the feedback or the corrective actions required, these are how we are amending the contract provisions. And so we anticipate coming back to you, I believe it's November 17th is your next meeting, and then December 4th is when we will brief the Human and Social Needs Committee, because we want to come to you before we go to them, and then that will be go to council approval December 13th.
And we can, Hamilton and the rest of us can get an advance copy of that agreement, so we can make prepared.
I believe so. I believe we can, Barbara would have to confirm if we're able to provide the draft before it's executed.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Mr. Cruz?
We understand that we're going to talk about the HMI system at a later time. Would you be willing to provide for us, and to Ms. Sharp, if you haven't already, more detail on the limitations you see of Pieces Iris? What is it that they don't have that you are used to having, or that you would think would be useful going forward? And also the data migration issue. If we get details on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, I think before the presentation on HMS, it's probably a good suggestion that we offer some of the significant service providers the opportunity to provide information in advance of that discussion for our consideration. Thank you.
First, thank you for your presentation. And I know you guys, it's a lot of work, so I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about your numbers. You said you served between 750 to 1,000 people a day. And so, if my math is right, that's could be 270,000 to 365,000 people a year. And looking at your revenue budget, I mean, how much more do you guys need? I mean, what's the number if you've run it in your head? If pie in the sky magically came down, what is that number you guys need to provide those services to all 365,000 people? It seems $9 million is a lot of money, but $9 million certainly isn't going to cover 365,000 people walking through your door every day, not just needing shelter, but needing all the other ancillary services that you guys provide. Where's the real number?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I do want to make clear is that while every single day, right, we're getting between 750 to 100 or to 1,000 unique people, those people duplicate throughout the year, so it's not gonna be that number times 365, right? So that number that we have in the first line there of the total people we've served, which is about 8,600, that's the unduplicated number. So just to make that distinction, but to your point, there's still 750 to 1,000 people coming through.
I think most guys are walking through your door.
Yeah, I would say that, it's really hard to put a finite, number on, boy, if we just had this, we could do everything. I think that, it's like anything in the city, right? I tell people all the time, right? If you feel like you need more, neighborhood police officers that advocate for investments in EPD, et cetera, if we want more impact on the city for homelessness, we need to fund it at a higher level. And I know what you're asking is to what level? There are different ways to go about it. In the city of Dallas, we've got about $25 million total that's allocated for homelessness. A city like San Francisco is 10 times that much, $250 million. So, they still have a problem, so they would probably suggest that that's not enough either. So, but I'm not going to sit here and try and advocate for $250 million. All I would say is that we've shown historically, as with any other provider, the more money we get, the more impact we have, and the more ability we have to implement innovative programs, right? That's when we talk about, what we're looking at is we've applied for this grant, from the state agency, or this grant from the Meadows Foundation. We're saying that these are needs for us, but we can't fund it through our normal, revenue model. So if we can get extra money, we can do extra things.
Thank you. Other questions?
So talking about HMIS, I'm wondering if you're actually maintaining both systems now and you're keying it both places you are so that you can have your historical data? Okay, wow.
In fact, one of the things is that, ultimately, our funders, they want to know what's correct. And if what we can't have in HMIS, if we have issues with it, we got to have something to fall back on. That's our continued commitment. And folks are asking for that as well. Hey, we may be concerned about this because you all send new client tracker errors about this.
Well, I think Client Track's done a good job, so I understand. So I'm wondering on page 6, you're talking about a lack of capacity. And I'm wondering if your 250 capacity, if you're including the pavilion, and how many people are sleeping in the pavilion, including that? And would you say the pavilion is full?
Yes. And we have thought about trying to expand it, but then we'd be worried about code coming in and that we have a problem. So yes, in the pavilion every night, 150.
Okay. If I could add to that real quick, one of the bullet points somewhere in here talked about how in 2016 we did formally present to the city council a plan to expand shelter. We found other areas on our campus that we could use as shelter, but the city council ultimately did not move forward with that. So if your question is, can we house more people at the bridge, the answer is yes.
And I know that your fire capacity is much bigger than your number that you're sheltering every night.
Right.
And so what do you think is your limitation?
We felt like we could comfortably add 50. The presentation we gave was a total of 240, and that was, using unused beds at Dallas Life and Salvation Army, and our component of that would have been 50. We felt like that was a comfortable number for us.
And so you just need extra funding to do that?
Correct, and we had mapped that out, what that would look like.
And then to Commissioner Kulak's point, how much funding would you need for 50 more?
I would have to look back because our financials that we provided the council was for that full 240, and that included, buying beds literally at Dallas Life, and that was a big part of the cost. So we can certainly run numbers on what 50 would look like for us. I'm happy to do that and present it to the commission.
So my other question is this, so if you see between 750 and 1,000 people, but you shelter 250, that means you've got 500 to 750 that are just day shelter, day services, right?
Correct, but a lot of those folks are receiving night shelter through Austin Street, Dallas Life.
Right,
and so on.
And so my question is, if that's happening, but I'm walking around downtown and there's a lot of people who are still just walking around with me that are homeless, how many more people need to be served during the day so that it's not like that? Are you full, like, we're full, we can't take anymore, you take more people to the day?
We never say no, you know, when it comes to people at the door.
I remember that saying.
We tell people that all the time. I mean, that's one of the things too, we tell the feeder groups, right? We're really trying to get them educated about, you're not doing any real good here in the sense that anybody who wants breakfast, anybody who wants lunch, they can come to the bridge and do it. We don't limit it. We don't say, no, we hit our number, we're out of food. We feed until, you know, the line is done. So it's not a question of us, you know, turning people away in that capacity. I would say that some of the folks that you're seeing downtown are panhandlers who are not experiencing homelessness. I think that's, you know, somebody who lives downtown, I think that's the bulk of my experiences. But for the other folks, they may be shelter resistant, you know, they may have such a significant mental health condition to where they're just, you know, not at a point to where they can step on our doors yet. But that's certainly something that we aspire to do, right, is through outreach efforts, is educate people about, you know, the kind of services that we provide and the fact that, you know, we're not turning people away. We have to turn people away for shelter. And to the extent that we can, we're connecting them with partner shelters, but yeah, we'll take all comers, send them our way.
So my last question is about page 16, you're talking about scatter site sheltering and housing. And the comment in there is that this is kind of what's best for the community, but there's not a comment about what's best for your guests. And I'm wondering, when you're saying scatter site like this, are you including services on site, or this is with no services on site?
This is with services on site. Again, our care managers, right now, folks who are going into housing, we've begun to track housing follow-up. Okay. One of the most difficult things is, while it's exciting for many of our guests who acquire housing, it's an extremely different experience when they're all by themselves. Okay, and that for many folks that can cause relapse. It's a lonely experience, and so for some folks who don't make their way back to us, we have care managers actually going out and checking on them, what's going on in terms of your immersion in the community, who are you connecting to, are you following up with Metro, all of those kinds of things. So we offer that support for 9 months, okay, in terms of that kind of experience.
But that's not on site.
That's, well, they're going off-site to a person's home to help them with how it is that they're reintegrating into the community.
If I can make a distinction, we wouldn't advocate for a scattered site permanent supportive housing or scattered site affordable housing, right? To where mixed income housing, for lack of a better phrase, right? So, yeah, there's a key distinction there. The folks that need services, we would want that to be concentrated and available to those folks.
One more question.
So, piggybacking on what she said, downtown Dallas and the Cedars and Farmers Market are impacted with quality of life issues from the bridge. And I feel like the presentation, thank you, Dr. Woody, was great, but it really doesn't underscore the real impact of the quality of life issues. And when you speak of expanding, adding beds, adding more services, the quality of life issues will go up. There's just an inherent issue, you know, when there is shelter services that are concentrated and taking on all that. So my question is, what are you going to do with the neighborhoods? How will you recognize the impact that increased services would have on that? I mean, it's just going to go up. When you pop out at 5 p.m., we're still there, you know, the neighbors are still there, so we're still feeling that sort of impact. They don't necessarily make the 911 call or the arrest or anything like that, but it's going to go up. So how will you affect change in that regard, aside from maybe moving or spreading out to other areas of the city?
Probably the first thing that we would be doing is communicating with folks in the community about
You're not doing that now?
about exactly what those quality of life issues may be. And again, through partnerships with Dallas Police Department, those kinds of things, how is it that we can collaborate to have an impact? Again, if we're inside 1818 Corsicana Street, we may not know exactly what's going on. So outreach, meeting with community groups, et cetera, and trying to reinforce the partnerships that we would have in respect to that increased need. We would want to be just as responsive as we are.
Okay, so if you're doing that now, can you tell me who the community groups are that you're dealing with now? Can you name anybody? Or is anybody around, you know? Who are you working with specifically to actively address the quality of life issues?
I mean, we work with all the neighborhood groups, and we attend all the meetings, and we're accessible. You know I'm accessible. I see you on a regular basis. What I would tell you though about, the shelter expansion component of it is, we're an advocate of more shelter generally, not necessarily more shelter at the bridge. But we're a resource and we can provide it easier than building something from scratch. But we definitely feel like there's a need for a satellite location, to where we can, the more that we're doing could be being done somewhere else, but absent a facility to do that, we can't do that all the time.
The impact of the shelter on the quality of life neighborhood is a complex issue. I mean, there have been changes over the years, I believe. If you'd like to comment on that, I mean, obviously if the shelter were not there, the quality of life issues might be much worse.
I expect so. I know when I go to the farmers market meeting, community folks who attend those meetings describe the improvements that they experience. That's why I'd expect you to go to other meetings as well. And I think that through dialogue and communicating with those folks, they are describing the impact that we are having. And of course, that kind of feedback only emboldens us to continue that and to work with folks in terms of what else can we do that they believe would have increased impact.
You have staff that is focused on communicating with the community about this.
Myself, Sam, and also we have care managers. It depends on the event. We'll actually have folks come out to our care management staff and actually describe the work that we're doing, who is available to come out at a moment's notice to assist folks. We're there to respond to the degree that we can.
All right, thank you very much. That was very informative. Now we'll turn to Ms. Sharp for the report of the Office of Homelessness.
Chair, is there a specific briefing you would like me to start with? I know we have like 4 more. Is there a specific one that you want me to start with that relates to the commission being able to ask questions, or do you want me to go in order as they are listed?
I think we can go in order, Lily. And we can have questions after each segment of your report.
So the first briefing that we will do, and I guess they'll bring it up shortly on the screen, is the highlights from San Antonio, from Seattle and San Francisco. That there were a few of us, Chair Webb was able to attend, Dr. Woody also attended. There was a representative from City Square, also Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance and the Austin Street Center. And so I wanted to be able to kind of go over the highlights of what we saw. We saw a lot of opportunities of how we can improve our operations here in Dallas, but we also had takeaways about policy implications. And so I'll talk through those on a high level, and you also all have the slides and give you the opportunity to ask questions. It's the highlights one. So while they're Washington's bringing it up, I'll make sure.
I think the commissioners have hard copies, is that correct? No?
You don't have a hard copy of this presentation?
Okay. All right, we have slides for any of the...
We do have slides.
presentations
Yes.
before we go up.
And so just to speak of them at a high level as she's bringing it up, is in Seattle, of course, that is the location where they have sanctioned encampments. We were able to visit the sanctioned encampments they have there, as well as the illegal encampments, and we also were able to see the navigation centers that they have there modeled after San Francisco. What we noticed at their sanctioned encampments is there was more organization. There was 24/7 security that was on site. One model was they had tiny homes that were connected to electricity with community meeting space for meals and for refrigerator, a shared refrigerator, and there were portable toilets that were on site that they would be able to use. At another site, they had tents basically that were raised on pallets. And so we saw a community there that was kind of organized. It was definitely low barrier, and it was an alternative way of having an encampment that was managed to minimize crime that takes place. But there definitely was challenges as far as lots of hoarding, because there weren't limits on possessions. And because I would say in the tiny home concept that was there in that sanctioned encampment, there were concerns about were there illegal activities that were taking place in the tiny homes because of that type of independence when it is so low barrier. And so what we saw from a navigation center standpoint is it was more community living, where there were sleeping rooms where multiple persons made there, and it increased more accountability as far as you could come in 24/7, you can leave when you want, but you wouldn't be, their issue wouldn't be drugs, in the sleeping room, because there are others that are there, and you could only be in the sleeping room to sleep. So, and again, though, the fact that there was day services and that flexibility to come throughout the day definitely became a benefit for them. And so in Seattle, that particular model was modeled after San Francisco. San Francisco's model with the navigation center was a lot more visibly appealing, and they were very critical of the way that they provide, or the perception of navigation centers. They felt that it's definitely a solution, or a short-term solution to transition from the typical emergency shelter concept in a concentrated area and be able to have navigation centers throughout the city, where again that 24/7 availability and access is included, because those shelters or those navigation centers are about 75 beds. So it's not your bigger shelter where you may have 400 beds or 250 beds, and again it's spread out through the city. And it became a resource for the street outreach workers. And so in both cities, they talked about how there was very limited groups that had access to place individuals in those navigation centers. So again, it would be their city street outreach team and whoever they were partnered with that would specifically place the unsheltered into those navigation centers, so that it's not just moving folks from one emergency shelter to another location. We also saw that their funding stream was very different than what we have here in Dallas. And so Sam had mentioned about San Francisco having about a $250 million budget, and 70% of their budget is used on permanent supportive housing. The other 30% of it is from services, and if I recall correctly, less than 10% of that is federally funded dollars. And so that allows them a lot more flexibility as it relates to, criteria and how you govern it, because they don't have the specific restrictions that come with federal funds and how you allocate that funding. Seattle also has a tax, the mental health tax, that's a part of King County, that allows them to be able to use those services for mental health services and substance abuse services. services, and it's about 1/10 of the tax that, I believe over a 2-year biennium period, they've raised about $134 billion just from the sales tax. And so those dedicated funding streams really help, again, be able to provide services, because we know that when it comes to permanent supportive housing or affordable housing overall, that funding for being able to have access to units means, do you have control over those units? So a landlord that is able to establish what their screening criteria that's going to have the most impact on an individual having access to that unit if they have a criminal background history or a bad rental history or their source of income discrimination because they have a voucher. Mr. Chair, would you like to add anything to what I've mentioned?
Sure, I'll make a few comments to put the thing in context. Seattle is a city with a population of 700,000, about 3 million in the metro area, which is smaller than Dallas. Their point-in-time count showed that they had more than 8,000 homeless, which is more than twice the number of our current count here. So I think their philosophy was to acknowledge that these encampments are going to occur, and so they embrace the opportunity to provide services, and they actually outsource those services to a third-party contractor, company in Lehigh, that has experience providing wraparound services at the encampments. A lot of them have to do with personal hygiene and sanitation, safety, very low barrier. I think they have one of their sanctioned encampments with no barrier, and they provided needle exchange programs and sharp programs for disposal, and just provided the services that the residents of those camps need. I think they are permitted by the Public Health Department, and there's a 2-year limit on the existence of the camp, so it is intended to be temporary. And they do have encampment closure issues like all cities do, but by city ordinance, they cannot close the camp unless 100% of the residents have somewhere else to be housed after the camp is closed.
Correct.
The reasons that the Seattle city personnel gave for what they think the success of these sanctioned camps has been is there are 5 reasons. One is increased feeling of safety. The inhabitants of the camp feel safer in either the tiny houses or the tents than they do on an open floor and shelter. Case management services that they've added to the camps through the contract with their contractor. They're often more comfortable, the tiny houses in particular, more comfortable than sleeping on a shelter floor, and they give a sense to the resident of the tiny house that this is my home, that a shelter resident doesn't get. They create a sense of community in the camps by giving everyone a role to do. I think there's one that actually paid the residents, others just require the condition of living in the camp that they perform kitchen duty, cleanup duty, whatever, just to make folks feel like they're contributing to the community, and thereby giving them a sense that they are part of the community. And they feel like that because of these services and these other factors, that these camps are a better pathway to permanent supportive housing than the shelter environment. They estimated that the cost of creating a tiny house camp, which was about 75 residents, I recall, was between $200,000 and $500,000, with $500,000 being the cost to include full electrical service and plumbing service. The one we visited did have electrical power, but it did not have full plumbing services, and it cost in the more than $200,000 range to create. And that site was intended to be affordable housing. There were plans to develop affordable housing units on that site, and they were using it as a tiny house encampment for the 2-year period before construction started on that site. San Francisco, similar in scale, its population is also less than 1 million, although it's extremely confined because of the geography of the area, and the metro area is also larger than that, but their PID count was also more than 7,000. And you mentioned the amount of money they spend and the percentage that goes to permanent supported housing. My recollection was they have 7,500 permanent supported housing units, many of which are housing family units. So they house more than 9,000 people in permanent supported housing. And the ratio of shelter beds to their homeless population is 25 shelter beds per 100 homeless persons. I don't know what else the ratio is, if we know that, but we have a need for more shelter beds. The San Francisco folks were a little bit critical of the Seattle improved encampment model because of what they perceived as safety issues, fire risk, etc. From a distance, I think the Seattle folks were very, very pleased with the outcomes of their approved encampment programs. Anything else on the report? Any questions from the commissioners?
Did you say they have 7,500 units in San Francisco that they're
Permits 4,000.
okay, and that's part of their annual budget? I know the $250 million.
I don't know how that money is spent. I don't know the breakdown. That's just some high-level numbers that we were given.
Okay.
So I don't know that you can determine a per bed cost by dividing that number into those two numbers. Yes, Mr. Garner?
Was there any, did you visit with any of the business owners or stakeholders around these, I guess, this sanctioned tent city, city-sanctioned tent city? Any visits with residents, stakeholders, to see how they were affected?
We didn't hear from actual residents that were outside of the area. We did meet with the chief, who talked about a lot of the concerns or issues that would happen. We engaged with a representative from a community association. Just so happened when we were visiting one of the sites, there was a representative from a neighborhood association that was passing out flyers because they were talking about bike safety and being able to navigate their bikes through some of the encampment areas. And so it seemed from their engagement that because they had a community person on staff, that they were very intentional about addressing community concerns. However, it's still, you're still going to have some of the challenges related to quality of life.
And that wasn't addressed on this trip, to see what challenges they were having, the community would have with these city-sanctioned tent cities? That wasn't addressed?
No.
We
didn't have on our agenda meeting with actual community associations.
Okay.
Did you talk to any of the groups about their HMIS adoption?
Yes, for Seattle, they have progressed significantly as it relates to a unified system. In San Francisco, there was 2 different systems that are being used, and they are working as a part of their strategic plan to also move to one unified system. The challenge is always which system, right? Who gets to determine which system? And so, that they're working with their continuum of care, but they have a system, I believe it's called One, that everyone is getting on board to use in San Francisco.
And so are all of the providers required to change their systems to go to this new one? Or is that just a system that collects data from each of the providers?
Any of them that will receive the continuum of care dollars and emergency solution grant dollars at minimum would have to, but the city of San Francisco and Seattle are requiring their subcontractors to use it.
Okay,
so it wouldn't be all service providers that are privately funded, but those that are funded through the city or receive continuum of care dollars are required to use that unified system.
And is the unified system that they are required to migrate to, is that something that's been developed from scratch just recently and for that area, or is that a more retail available sort of off-the-shelf subscription service?
I believe, I'm thinking about San Francisco. I believe it was actually a system that had already been in place that they are customizing to improve, to match what their needs are, but I don't believe that it was one from scratch.
Okay, I like that. Existing system and customizing. Those are
Right.
important terms.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think both cities are still feel like they have progress to make on issues as Dallas does. Seattle, for example, said the one burning need they had was for more mental health counseling services at their encampments. And the coordination among service providers seems to be a ever-present issue for all major cities.
We could just go to the takeaway slide that's here on last, and we'll make sure we have these to you all. Again, talking about the local resources compared to the federal resources, as well as how navigation centers were used to basically decentralize the concentration of homeless individuals at the larger emergency shelters. We also saw that their street outreach team had a very coordinated encampment and engagement process that had a lot of parties involved that helped them to be, I would say, more responsive to communities' concerns. And also, I know in San Francisco, they actually published the schedule. And so their operations was very advanced and strategic. And so there's definitely opportunities to learn from that as well.
Yes, one other aspect of the scattered site and small encampment model that Seattle felt like was important was it became more difficult after a certain tipping point, which I believe was 75 people, to bring about the coordination among the residents that you need to have everyone involved and have a role in the community and to generate that sense of community. Anything beyond that, it becomes unwieldy and more difficult to implement some of those intangible benefits of a smaller encampment. Mr. Cruz?
Thank you.
Mr. Grace.
So I'm just on a very steep learning curve here, yes. But did you have any discussions on either of these tours with how folks relate to other organizations that come in to help homeless folks? For instance, churches that come and provide meals and so forth. Someone, just to let you know what that came out of, someone approached me this week and made the statement as though it were fact, that here a homeless person could get 8 to 9 full meals a day because of the number of people that are there, with great intentions. Mm-hmm. But did you all have any discussions about how they try to engage other well-meaning, helping organizations, maybe harness or educate those folks? Mm-hmm.
So they do, of course, as a part of their continuum of care, have a number of partners that are providing services, and just as we are through contracts trying to promote collaboration and equity, that is something that they strive for. We didn't have much conversation about if there's a lot of duplication of services from some of those service providers, but we do know at those navigation centers and as well as the encampments they had, that there would be specific dedicated providers that are working at those specific sites. But through the continuum of care, and because they still had your typical emergency shelters and other service providers that provide day services.
And just for my edification, I mean, I don't mean to make you my educator, but does that ring true to you? Do you think that there's a gross over-duplication of those kinds of efforts here in Dallas?
I do believe that there are a lot of, when you say meals, so for that example, that there are a lot of providers that provide meals at the same time, or even throughout the day, even if it's not at the same time, that we do not have a shortage of meals in the community, whether that's for those that are homeless or impoverished.
Okay, thanks.
Now, in San Francisco, and particularly the Tenderloin district where we were, which has the highest concentration of their homeless population, there's a very strong public-private partnership, particularly with, was it St. Jude's Church?
St. Anthony.
St. Anthony, excuse me, in the Tenderloin that provides many services, including job training, and there's a job placement aspect to it. They have coordinated with a lot of the high-tech companies in the area to to assist in the job training and the job placement, and they found that they've shown these Google and other high-tech companies that the folks that come through out of their job training programs that were homeless make good employees, and so now they've developed a really strong relationship with local employers as well as nonprofits in the area. So I don't know whether they have issues with other nonprofits doing their own thing and duplicating efforts, but they seem to be very organized and very structured. St. Anthony's provides a lot of funding for that as well, so it's a very strong public-private partnership in San Francisco that we were witness to. So.
I just have a point of order to ask. Do we have a hard stop at 4:30?
We do not. Thank you. Mr. Cruz?
Looking at San Francisco with their navigation centers, they seem quite proud of the distributed model. And I'm just wondering if prior to that effort, was their population in need of those services already fairly distributed over the city, or is that something that they accomplished intentionally? Okay. I was just saying, with the distributed navigation centers in San Francisco across the city, prior to that effort, was their population in need of those services already fairly distributed, or was that something they intentionally accomplished?
They intentionally accomplished, their intention was to spread it throughout the city, particularly because that's the only way they were really getting neighborhood buy-in. And so one of their requirements is that a navigation center would only be there for 2 years. So there would be a permit, for the sanctioning encampment, there was a permit for 2 years. And so then after that 2 years, they would have to find another location. And so that would allow everyone to kind of share the responsibility and of knowing that this is a temporary situation in our area versus a permanent shelter.
Okay, if there are any more questions, we'll take one more on this. Otherwise, I will propose that we defer your presentation on the evaluation criteria for selecting supportive housing sites to a future meeting, and ask that you give a brief presentation on bond proposition J.
I will mention that the Human and Social Needs meeting is November 6th, and that evaluation review will be on their agenda. And so they were anticipating feedback from you all to be a part of that. So if we don't do that briefing today, if you would please provide any feedback via email so that I can make sure that it's incorporated in the briefing.
Okay, well,
that's on November
if they're
6th.
expecting our feedback at their next meeting, which is before our next meeting, perhaps we should do that, but I'm just trying to be cognizant of the fact that we're running significantly behind time here. So. Okay, well, let's do that then.
Okay. So you want the evaluation?
Yes. Have those slides been distributed?
Yes.
Yes.
No? You all should have.
You do have the slides for presentation? Okay.
Okay. So for we want to propose evaluation criteria so that it's very clear to the community as well as for staff and for all stakeholders involved on what we should be considering as factors when we recommend sites for supportive housing. And so just for a little bit of background, we have multiple programs that have supportive housing. So there's scattered site supportive housing. There's also master leasing that some of our subcontractors do, which means they basically have the lease on the units and then they sublease with those tenants. And there's also the project-based programs. And so City Council has requested that we have some specific guidelines that ensures that when we're recommending sites that they are safe, they are healthy, that they give access to public transportation, and then of course that we're not just going to areas that are
or not always going to areas that are impoverished. And so, next slide. And so what I have listed here is what would trigger this proposed evaluation. That would be the new development of units, any master leasing arrangements, whether that's from city or subcontractors, and also project-based programs. The proposed evaluation criteria that would be considered for location is to look in areas that are considered high opportunity. And when we talk about high opportunity, that's basically a census tract where there's less than 20% of the poverty rate, and then also that attendance zone for the elementary zone, for the elementary school has the MET standard rating. It also would be a location where there's access, right? Access to grocery stores, so it's not in a food desert. There's access to public transportation. There's access to mental and medical facilities. And then it's also not, we would also look at, is it in a targeted action area grid that the Dallas Police Department has? If so, what does that look like? Where are they in addressing any objectives that needs to be met? But then also seeing, is it in an emerging area? So is there development that's growing that's actually going to make it less impoverished so that it becomes a high opportunity area because of the development that's coming? Or if there's not already a grocery store because it's a food desert, is there a grocery store that's planned in the next year that would end up making it more accessible? We also have proposed evaluation for the property itself. And so there's the location, thinking about the vicinity, the neighborhood amenities, but then the property itself, is it in compliance with code requirements? Is it in compliance with the multi-tenant registration? And so we have listed here using a crime prevention lease addendum. Do they have a crime watch group, and is there meeting attendance? Are they willing to sign a tri-party agreement in which the city signs as well as the client and the property owner? And then of course we have listed there receiving consultation from the council member, from the patrol division, the neighborhood police officers from that area, code compliance, and the community prosecutor's office, just to do our due diligence to make sure that these areas again will help support the quality of life and improve the quality of life for those that we are placing there. Additional factors that we would of course have to consider is it affordable? Are the costs reasonable? So what would it cost for them to move in? What kind of support do we have from the neighborhood outside of the council member? And but looking at those business owners that are in the area and other residents, homeowners, and tenants in the area. Also making sure that whatever we're doing is consistent with any new housing policies that are in place, whether that's from a federal standpoint or local ones that have been adopted. There's been a lot of talk about the market value analysis that will be coming and looking at how that may impact where supportive housing should be, and then also the ability for, with a community room. So if you have a project-based program, you also want to be able to bring the program, the clients together and offer different services and have a place for the caseworkers to be on site. There are some challenges, of course. We know the challenges as it relates to placement, the limited availability of housing, the concerns from community, the tenant selection criteria, and also the willingness of property owners to have a program, in their units. And so with that, there are some possible solutions, and that would include establishing a housing policy that would expand the available supportive housing units. So whenever there is a housing policy, that it has a provision to say that there would be units that are set aside for those that have incomes 0 to 30%, as well as consider master leasing agreements from the city side. So the city currently we do not have any master leasing arrangements where the city leases with that property owner, but that would give us flexibility to be able to determine what the screening criteria is, and of course eliminate the whole source of income discrimination that comes with those having a voucher. There's also, we definitely would need to make sure we engage the community prior to recommending sites to council for any of the programs. And then because there may be gaps in funding of the subsidies that are through grants, then there may be a need or at least an opportunity to allocate funding to be able to fill some of those gaps that address moving costs or whatever the difference is between the subsidy and the actual rent amount. And then the final bullet there is developing a landlord partnership program. So I mentioned one of the challenges is, just the willingness of a landlord to be a partner. If there was some type of landlord partnership program where there would be a grant to be able to, for them to enhance their property or, just something else to incentivize outside of what the typical move-in costs are, that may encourage more partners, new partners that are willing to make their units available. So I mentioned that our next step, we are going to be briefing the Human and Social Needs Committee, and then we plan to come back to you all at your next meeting to discuss the feedback that came from the Human and Social Needs Committee, and then hope to have a final draft by the end of the year.
Yes, Mr. Hammond.
One of the things I think that would be helpful before we even start having this discussion would be to know how many current permanent supportive housing units there are in the city and or the county, know where they are. Just to, as a starting point, I have no idea. And I've tried to do some research on that, but is that information that's available?
We can definitely, we have continuum of care funding, we meaning the city of Dallas actually receives continuum of care funding, so we can definitely collect it on our end, and then all of the continuum of care dollars that are allocated. There are some supportive housing units that are funded by other sources, so if it's private, then it may be a little bit more difficult to get, but we can definitely get that information.
I think that would be very helpful. And the other thing I think that would be very helpful is to get a better understanding of the Dallas Housing Authority, how many apartments they have, where they're located, and if any of those are dedicated as permanent supportive housing or not. I just don't know any of that data.
Right, and also there's been litigation in the past affecting Dallas and the state of Texas regarding the disparate impact of placement of housing in existing low-income and high minority population areas. So I assume these policies have been analyzed with respect to the geographic
Which is why we use that concept of high opportunity areas, because there's a push to develop new housing or put supportive housing or lower income housing in areas that aren't already concentrated with affordable housing and low income individuals.
Has the city attorney's office been involved in that analysis from the standpoint of?
They have, as well as the Fair Housing Department. We actually have a Fair Housing Department here, and so they've been working together on that. Ms. Martinez, is there anything you want to? No. But I can say that we, as far as what is triggered by what this evaluation, when I listed what the triggers are, the city only has one program that would be triggered, and that's the Gateway program, which is 70 project-based units.
So one suggestion, Mr. Chair, might be that we create this is a pretty important issue.
Yes.
And maybe we create some kind of subcommittee that focuses on that issue, particularly with the bond election coming up and potentially $20 million of funds coming in that could be utilized. I've tried developing some permanent supportive housing, and it's really, really hard to do. So anyway, I think all this information, it's a great discussion. I think there's general acknowledgement that we don't have enough permanent supportive housing in our city, and how do we get more? And so I think this is a very critical issue that deserves some extra time and attention from our committee. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, I think you're right, and we will have an opportunity to participate in the discussion on how the bond funds, assuming the bond package is approved, how those are allocated and the RFP process.
Correct.
So that'll be a separate issue, but you're right on the site selection criteria is a more immediate and more discrete issue, but it does. It might be useful rather than just try to discuss it, cold, so to speak, at this meeting. If we establish a small group to gather some more data
Correct, and of course, this briefing is requesting feedback on are there missing criteria that we need to consider when evaluating where supportive sites should be located.
May I add one? So you have the school rating, which I think is great, but there doesn't seem to be consideration for the school capacity. And so if a school already has closed enrollment for grades or has portables, I don't think that should be a site that's considered. I am going to go back to the whole issue of scatter site and if there's caseworkers on site. My understanding from one of your partners is that they are actually moving their office, which is located in an apartment, on site for supportive housing because either the city or somebody has designated that as not allowed anymore, even though they've done it for many years. So when you say that you're considering one of the items is there office space for the caseworker, I'm not sure where that would be in an apartment complex.
So there are requirements if you're using a unit, a residential unit for another use besides a residential use. And so it's not that it's not allowable completely, it's that you have to have the appropriate permit. The owner would have the appropriate permit that says we have a residential unit that's being used for a purpose other than a primary residence.
And so my third item is, so one of the items you had on there is about engaging the community. And my question is, if the community says we don't want this, and then what? So you say addressing the concerns of the community. Well, if the concerns of the community are, whatever it is, traffic, drugs, whatever, if there is no way to address those, does that mean you're not going to do it because the community doesn't want it, or what does that mean actually?
So these would all be factors that we need to do our due diligence on, right? So if this is one long checklist and it says we engaged the community and we collected feedback and this is what they said and we saw how close, public transportation is, and so we have this full checklist and be able to compare a number of different sites and try to choose which one has the least amount of risk, that has the most accessibility, that's the safest. And so that way, when we do come to Citizen Homeless Commission, we go to Human and Social Needs, we let you know, here's what, we evaluated and here are the results. What is your recommendation? Based on all of the information we collected and showing what our due diligence was. And then from there, we take it to council for council's approval.
I'd like to go back to when you're identifying if a neighborhood of location has opportunities. You listed a number of categories, but it's not quite as simple as black and white having a grocery store or not. There are a variety of different grocery stores, some of which aren't frankly affordable for day-to-day shopping for the average citizen, never mind someone just getting back on their feet or back into a housing situation. Similarly with healthcare facilities, access to medicine, are we talking a local dentist and a pediatrician or being next door to an urgent care clinic? There's a lot more nuance in that. I'd like to see that fleshed out quite a bit more.
Most definitely, totally agree. And back to that checklist, so it would, the checklist that I envision that we're working on drafting is that there would be categories. You wouldn't just check off, yes, there's a grocery store, but what is the grocery store, and be able to answer some questions, as far as private medical care, is there a community clinic or, what type of mental health services are in the area? Is it truly access? And even if we say, yes, there's public transportation, how close is it and how long is the bus ride to get to a grocery store? So yes, there's a lot of follow-up questions that we would have to consider as we're assessing this criteria.
One specific thing when you talk about accessibility, you did mention, I believe one of the line items was for mobility impairments, physical impairments, making sure that the buildings are accessible, the actual housing units are accessible. But please do consider that more broadly. So when you're determining if there's a grocery store available, is the grocery store handicap accessible? Is every crosswalk, every sidewalk in good repair, every crosswalk have ADA compliant ramps? It's required, but some streets haven't been repaired in a while. They may pre-exist those requirements. So is the path from the housing unit to all the other considerations actually accessible? Actually safe crossing, well lit, ADA compliant?
Thank you.
Other questions or suggestions, Mr. McMahon?
Yeah, in response to Ted's question about the supply and location of permanent supportive housing. It's my understanding that the MDHA dashboard is required to report that information regarding both supply and demand, and but it only reflects those mandated by HUD participation in the, I suspect, very limited number of voluntary participants within that.
Correct.
So is there in fact an assessment of the total inventory of permanent supportive housing?
There have been attempts. I don't know that there is one that we can say is very accurate, and that's kind of what I spoke to, that those that are mandated to report it,
Right.
we can collect that, but those that are using other funding sources, it may not, even if it's available, it may not match the definition of what we call permanent supportive housing. It may match the definition of transitional housing, or, but we'll make every effort to see what's available and provide it.
I would just share my frustration. I've been involved in a couple of unsuccessful attempts to develop permanent supportive housing on a purely private basis without any federal funding, and it's impossible. So anything that the City of Dallas can do to make it more, just a little bit more likely to happen would be helpful, because waiting on strictly federal funded permanent supportive housing in 25 units and 40 units is going to take a long time to make an impact.
So would you say there are any guidelines that we had listed here that you would recommend taking away as it relates to the property and location?
I mean, I think it's more when somebody brings something that's not within your list of defined opportunities, but which in every other respect is, yeah, it's fantastic. It is, has access. It has neighbors that are more supportive than maybe somewhere else, and has funding that doesn't require going through the HUD process. It's still really difficult to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my experience is the same. With the 9% tax credits especially, you can't do it without neighborhood support, and you can't get neighborhood support for it.
Right.
It's impossible. So, I mean, I guess City Square proved us wrong and did the cottages, but there's no neighbors there, so. So anyway, it's extremely difficult. With the 4% credits, I think you could do it, and you could stretch the city's $20 million bond money a lot further with 4% credits. But so, and actually, I think it's a very good idea, although limiting the sites too much will make it so we'll never have one. So
Right.
we need to.
And that's part of the
thinking
reason
about
we
it.
didn't make this as like a point scale, but more so we need to consider all of these factors so that we have shown that we're doing our due diligence as it relates to recommending sites before just making it a supportive housing site.
I would just, pardon me.
Go ahead, you haven't said.
Well, I just, in support of Mr. McMahon and Mr. Hamilton, I think it's good that we take into consideration, the private sector that is trying to bring solutions. So I wish we could make it a guideline, and if there is a way where, if it's not even favorable to these well-meaning great citizens who want to be involved, I think we need to rethink this, because if not, all you're doing is creating a unilateral decision that's really not going to be effective at all. And it just serves other interests, perhaps not the citizens' interest.
And I actually have one statement and then one question. Since we're trying to retrofit a shelter into a neighborhood, essentially, what if the city sort of developed a template, of maximum of 30 beds and maybe 4 tiny homes on site and maybe a capacity of 5 mental health patients, just a standard template, and then let the neighborhood that it goes into establish maybe like a boutique a boutique shelter rather, not a hotel, not a motel either. Just let the neighborhood build it so that it fits the identity of the neighborhood, LGBTQ, or, different, there's different types of homeless persons. There's different, groups, and it would be more supportive, I think, more supported by the neighborhood if the neighborhood had a lot of input on how it was built, based on a template, perhaps, a small template shelter that would be a low impact. So that's just one suggestion. And then, since you brought up the cottages, since it is PSH, and there are no neighbors, what's the success rate? Are they full? I mean,
is it a good working model? Can it be replicated, or is it failing?
So they're still in that time frame of being, of evaluating themselves and working out some of the kinks. I do believe there are a few vacancies the last time I've heard, so they're not at 50. I know that at least one of them was from a death, but then there also has been eviction, and so the county has been working very closely with City Square to be able to make sure that there's a waiting list that's ready to put people in as soon as, there's a vacancy. And their property management has been looking at how to kind of look back over what their model is, and just from the short time that they've been open, how they need to improve it. Okay. So they would tell you that they have some lessons learned that they could share on what they wouldn't do again and what may be working.
Okay. Do we know how many of the cottages are occupied? Since it is for chronic homeless, which is...
Yes, I can find out from you. The last number I had was it was about 3 weeks ago. And so I want to make sure that it's accurate number.
You don't want to share that?
Well, I believe the number at that time was 46.
46?
We're
Okay.
out of the 50.
Okay.
But that may have changed since then.
Okay, thank you.
I think Larry James has said that they are in general at capacity, but they do have some turnover, and there may be some gaps in filling units, but they are at full capacity as a general rule for the thanks.
May I ask, because the city gave so much money to the cottages, do you actually get affirmative names of who's there? Because I'm actually hearing through the grapevine that there's like 15 openings, and that Larry James is sharing information saying 95% of the people who are there are the ones who are there when it opened, but yet that's not what's being said on the street amongst the people who are living there. And I think even in our audience, we know there are people who are experiencing homelessness who are saying, yeah, that's... And so I'm wondering if you have a name roster from when it opened to now, if you can see that there really has been much more significant turnover.
The Office of Homeless Solutions doesn't. The funding that was contributed was from the Housing, Neighborhood, and Revitalization Department, and I know they have reporting requirements, so I can check to see what type of data they're getting and how often they're getting. I know that the county is seeing that list and managing it because they actually help screen and place those folks there, but I can find out what information we're getting because of our contribution.
So I've also had some conversations with some small property owners that have just a few units that want to participate in providing housing for the homeless population. Is there a way for them to plug into the wraparound services through cooperation with other organizations in the city so that they could become permanent supportive housing?
Your question is, can other providers partner with the city to provide some additional?
In particular, small property owners that want to be involved but don't have large developments. Is there a way that they don't have the expertise to provide the supportive services that's necessary for permanent?
It's definitely worth discussing. So if they're property owners and they have units that meet the criteria, then of course the unit may be able to be available. And then if there's supportive services that they themselves want to provide, then it would just be based on, again, what type of service they're wanting to provide and how that works within what's already been provided.
Okay, and so a process for connecting them with shelter providers or others who need the place to refer their residents would be an important piece of that process as well. So,
correct.
Yes, okay. Other questions? So, Mr. Hamlin, would you like to make a motion that we establish a subcommittee to study this issue further?
What are your thoughts?
Well, Ms. Sharp, you have some feedback that you can take to the commission, to the committee. So I think going forward, we will have subcommittees to study the issue, particularly in connection with the bond package and the development of housing. And we'll have, at a future meeting, we're going to have a report on more long-term needs and priorities of the community. So perhaps we can
I would be happy to lead that subcommittee if you'd like. And I'd love to work with Charlotte on getting the data, just because I've never seen it, and I'd be very interested to know how many permanent supportive housing units there are, where they're located. So I'd be happy to try to run with that, if that was the question.
Yeah, so the question is whether
do we need a motion?
Is there sentiment for a subcommittee specifically to assist on the evaluation of the site selection criteria?
So moved. I second it.
Yes, second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, that's passed. Okay. And I think Mr. Hamilton has volunteered to chair that. There are other volunteers. Mr. Cruz, Mr. Castillo, Ms. Garner. All right. Do we have Mr. Cruz, Mr. Castillo, Ms. Garner, other, Mr. Kulak to serve as members of that subcommittee? Okay. So I guess we'd have a formal motion to approve the formation of that committee with those 5 members. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
There we go.
Second.
Mr. Cruz and seconded.
Seconded.
Mr. Headley, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. So, Ms. Sharp, if you will work with Mr. Hamilton to get the data that this committee needs to perform that evaluation. Okay. So, would you like to give us an overview of the bond proposition, J?
Yes, sir. Whatever you ask for, Chair.
It's on the agenda, so please proceed.
So as you know, there are multiple propositions a part of the bond that will be a part of the November 7th ballot. And so we'll specifically talk about Proposition J, which relates directly to you all. On this first slide, get to the first slide. We actually basically are including a timeline, and I think you all may have those slides. And so in there you'll see that we started out with a lot of community engagement. The city council then approved the bond program on August 9th, and then the bond election will be November 7th. Shortly after that, there will be, depending on the project, so like the street projects and some of the other projects, there will be a selection. They'll actually release the request for qualifications. And I'll go ahead and go to slide 4, which basically talks about Proposition J, the homeless assistance facilities. And so it's $20 million that's specifically for permanent housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and the funding will be allocated through a competitive bid process. It can also be used for homeless assistance facilities, which would include day centers as appropriate. There was the Dallas Commission on Homelessness report. There was actually a subcommittee that kind of focused on, okay, how much permanent supportive housing would be needed, how much rapid rehousing, and there were some ballpark numbers. So that from those ballpark numbers, it was recommended that by 2021, 995 permanent supportive housing units are needed. And so even taking that, which because of the nature of the population, how many that we have that are homeless and are chronically homeless, that still may not be enough, right? Especially when we say we need to really look at what exists that may not be in what we already have, through the MDHA dashboard. But we're assuming that when we would go out through a competitively bid process, we would have your feedback, the Citizen Homeless Commission feedback, and the Human and Social Needs Committee feedback on what those specifications would look like to procure and make sure that it encourages collaborative partnerships, that the wraparound services would be available. This funding would only be able to pay for units, so not operations. And so any respondents that would submit a proposal would have to cover the leverage that's required for the supportive services, for any subsidy assistance that's needed, because again, this funding would be for units. And so initially this $20 million was part of the bond that was for economic development and housing. And so with the timing of it and wanting to make sure we had feedback from the commission, because we already, at that point, a commission had already been approved through ordinance, as well as the local government corporation had already been approved through ordinance, that we wanted to make sure that it's going to be reflective of what your feedback is on what we need as far as the breakdown of rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing to transitional housing. And again, the concept of having day centers would be as appropriate, because if we think that, if we have a goal for making services equitable throughout the city, so they're not just concentrated in particular areas, that may mean that if there's more supportive housing in certain parts of the city, then there also needs to be some day centers in those areas for folks that would want to take advantage of them, versus day centers being concentrated in or around downtown.
So as Mr. Hamilton has pointed out, there are a lot of very significant issues that are raised by how this money should be best spent, if assuming this bond package passes. And we're going to have a presentation, I think, at the next month's meeting regarding longer-term housing issues and priorities. And so I think specific discussion of Proposition J and the bond money and how that should be spent is beyond the scope of today's meeting. But we do have a lot of work to do on that issue, and we'll be taking that up at our next meeting. And by then we'll know if the bond package is passed, and we'll dive into that, and we'll establish subcommittees at that point as well.
And I do know that there have been some questions asked in relation to this specific proposition. For one, what can we as city staff and you all as commissioners, what all are you able to say or do? And so you are not able to advocate for it as a commission or under the title of a commissioner. Of course, you get to vote, but from an advocacy standpoint, you're not able to do that as a commissioner. And I, as staff, cannot appear in any way that I'm advocating for the proposition as well. The city attorney's office has provided the language that we can provide to you all just on the specific ordinance about political activity and advocacy for any proposition. There has also been a question asked about how much money have we given in the past 5 years that are for costs that would be eligible under this proposition. Because they are different, because of the shift in the departments and transitions, we're working on getting the best number, but from what I have available so far, there's probably been $4 to $5 million over the past 5 years that has been contributing to programs or projects that are related to this proposition. Majority of it was for the cottages as well as Serenity Place. That with Citywide Community Development Corporation, and that was a total of about 95 homeless units between the two projects. So cottages was 50 units, and then Serenity Place was 45 units.
So I was just going to say, I was on the bond subcommittee for this, and we did not turn into the bigger bond committee that the 20 million would be for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. I know things were changed and that's fine, but I don't think it's on the city website that that's what that's for either.
Okay.
And then I also might need to talk to the city attorney because I may have posted things on Facebook about my opinion about whether people should support the bond. So, just thought I'd throw that out there.
I'm sure it was appropriately limited, so.
Maybe, can we just make the distinction, speaking as a citizen of Dallas? Yes, we can, as long as you make that distinction that you're speaking as a citizen and not a commissioner.
The attorney has said yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
As long as you didn't say, I, Kara Mendelson, commissioner of.
Yes.
I usually do, but I don't think I did that time.
Yes, the city attorney's office has provided the code section to me right before this meeting. It says you can't use the prestige of the city official's position with the city on behalf or to advocate for the proposal. But as a private citizen, you can do so. So are you going to provide a written response to the specific requests that with respect to the the monies that were spent over the last 5 years?
Yes, I will provide a written response. It actually came up as an open records request as well, so we'll make sure, again, I just want to make sure that it's accurate as possible, just because there are certain, there are different departments that have different funding sources related to the proposition.
And can you make sure it's on the website, that it says what it's to be used for? Because I don't think it's on there now.
Most definitely, I will definitely work. This actually was a slide that came from the capital bond program slide, so I'll clarify that and make sure we're good.
Okay, are there any questions, Mr. McManaman?
Yeah, I'm glad you went to page 4, Ms. Sharp. On the bottom bullet, third bullet, regarding the seamless wraparound services, you referred to awarding funding to, I'll say, developers who will be required to provide the services as well. Did I understand that correctly?
So the specifications, again, we want your feedback is going to be through that, but there's a lot of ways that can be done. It can be a requirement that a developer would have to have a partnership with a supportive housing provider. So that's one way, is making sure that, because, and it depends on what it is that we want to buy, right? So if we don't want to buy permanent supportive housing, then that wouldn't be a part of the specifications. But if that was a requirement, that we wanted the units to have supportive services, and the bond could only cover the actual construction of the unit, then normally in the specifications you would say document your partnership with an entity that would cover the supportive services. And again, that's if from you all, and that you say that's what you think the need is for the bond if it was approved.
It's my observation that there are a number of property owners in the city right now that have a property that they would love to partner with someone to upgrade that, so that it would be voucher qualified, and they don't want to have anything to do with running it after that point.
Right.
So I just want to make sure, because I misunderstood. I thought you said originally it was going to be coupled together, and I think developers are really good at developing.
Right.
No offense, Mr. Hamilton, and folks that handle the services are generally really good at doing that, and the fact that they come together, they're still two separate, because I sure would want to be able to terminate a contract in year 3 if the organization responsible for services fails. It's going to be hard to terminate Mr. Hamilton.
And if I can use Houston as an example for that, when they put out a request for proposal for new affordable housing, they had a bid that was for all multiple funding sources for multiple project types. And so respondents were able to specifically say, okay, I want to bid for this particular component. And so, for instance, if that was just rapid rehousing units or permanent housing units versus permanent supportive housing units, or again, they may say that to show the capacity that this deal is going to work, I have a partnership with this particular entity that is going to manage the facility, deal with the operations, and I'm just developing it. Again, typically with the RFP, it would just require documentation that we're going to get what we are paying for.
That is a huge progress in the city of Dallas if that happens, to enable private landlords to be able to upgrade their facilities to make them voucher qualified, and that could really generate a lot of housing stock in small increments of 25 and 40 units, which I think is going to be more popular around this group. A second, just real quick, do you have a sense as to whether the city's view is a preference for single resident occupancy, SROs, or is it like in Houston, which is the predominant plan or practice, or is it also for multiple occupant units?
So, from a staff standpoint, we don't necessarily have a preference. We want to, of course, follow best practices, and so it's going to depend on the model that would be wrapped around. If it's a single room occupancy versus a shared housing situation, congregational housing, all of those different types of housing impacts what type of subsidy could probably be used to support it, and so that's usually what triggers the preference part. It wouldn't necessarily be the city, but the developer, you know, and others involved on saying, okay, if I build this type of unit, is it eligible for the various subsidies that you would want to be accessible to? Yes, ma'am.
Conrad?
Yeah, just like you said, that's another question. How do I go about, because I have a landlord, but he doesn't know the steps to take to upgrade or to get it Section 8 ready, if you will.
So Dallas Housing Authority has a very clear landlord and inspection process. They actually have like landlord trainings for those that want to be on their approved landlord list, and they will go through the process of this is what it means to meet their housing quality standards.
Okay, so next question. There's no funding to help this property be upgraded, if you will, to be Section 8 ready.
There are funding sources and requests for proposals that sometimes come through the city for rehab projects to develop affordable housing.
What about Habitat for Humanity? This is just a thought, it's not an actual action yet. I was going to build a rapport with Habitat for Humanity because this landlord has these properties and, you know, it's just like, he doesn't really know what to do, you know what I mean? And they need rehab. And so I know with the Habitat with Humanity, you have to do so many hours in that program in order for you to get a house through them. So it'd be kind of like a win-win situation where they could put in hours of rehab over at this property or that property, you know, and build hours for the person in the program for Habitat for Humanity, but it also will upgrade this property to make it presentable and livable for somebody that's in a shelter that wants to transition into either sharing a home or renting rooms.
We can definitely discuss, you know, ways that different property managers can become knowledgeable on what the requirements are for inspections and also any available funding for those types of projects. I can connect you with staff in the Housing, Neighborhood, and Revitalization Department too, who usually is the department that puts out funding related to rehab.
I'm going to show you the landlord workshop link on the DHA website right now.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions for Charlotte? Okay, thank you very much. And now Ms. Mendelson, apologize for how far behind schedule we are.
I'm gonna go fast.
Okay, so we're going to talk about...
Oh, good. Wake up, let's do it.
We're going to talk about some community priorities that were identified by the Homeless Commission last summer, the temporary commission. As I said, next month we're going to take up more long-term priorities and issues. And so if you'll walk us through some of the priorities that were identified back then, and then we'll solicit ideas on other priorities and determine how we move forward on fleshing out some ideas for how we meet those priorities.
So thank you. The Dallas Commission on Homelessness that the mayor appointed, two of our commissioners were also on it with me, so Ted and Casey. And we also split into subcommittees, and almost all of the work was done there. None of us, I don't believe, were on the subcommittee that was chaired actually by Tanya Reagan, who's in the audience, which is the subcommittee on community engagement. Unfortunately, that entire subcommittee report wasn't even included in the final report, but I think it's on the web. Did you put it on the website with this meeting? Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. And one of the things that we heard from city council members and from people in the community was that, wow, we spent all this time and all this effort, and where to go, and we lost that base of knowledge. And the other thing that I think all of us have probably heard many, many times is, wow, we've been talking about a homeless crisis in Dallas for 10, 15, 20 years, and how many reports are there, and how many initiatives are there, and it doesn't seem like anything's being done or anything has changed. So just to quickly kind of talk about the reach of the Community Engagement Subcommittee, they had over 550 people attend 6 different public meetings that went over a span of 8 weeks. They had lots of comments, 196 is what's on here. They did a community survey that was online. It was through their Facebook page, which is still active. I think it's called Homeless Solutions for Dallas, I'm not sure. And again, you can see 700 comments from 370 different respondents. And all of these participants in the meetings and online came from every single council district in our city, which I think is outstanding, as well as people who are outside the city. And, you know, maybe if you're in the city, you think, wow, maybe people outside the city shouldn't be saying anything. But the truth is that many of our nonprofit leaders don't live in Dallas and do have an expertise that they were sharing. So I don't think that's bad. So one of the things that they did is they put together a list of the negative effects of homelessness. And so that's this list. And I think Linda sort of alluded to some of this, but when we're seeing this homeless crisis, these are some of the things that the community pushes back about, right? Litter, trash, public urination and defecation, harassment, loitering during daytime, public intoxication, public nudity, obstruction, panhandling, and public sleeping. And so these themes came up over and over and over again. And you know, I don't think this is what anybody wants Dallas to be known for. And I put this on here because I want to talk about the short-term ideas that were generated, as well as maybe ideas we have that weren't generated then. A whole year has gone by, and frankly, the situation about homelessness in Dallas has changed in a year. And maybe there's other things that need to be done that weren't discussed. So I put that on there because I think what you'll see on the next slides is that every one of these short-term solutions goes back to dealing with these negative effects. So the next slide is actually suggestions for long-term solutions. So I didn't want to leave off long-term altogether, but you can see why my interest anyhow is let's talk about now. Let's talk about what we can do in the next 90 days to 6 months that'll make a noticeable difference in our city and in our community for both the people who are experiencing homelessness as well as the people who live, work, play in places where this is extremely prevalent. So a lot of the long-term solutions centered around housing. You know, the way to end homelessness is a house. Okay. Affordable, scattered, housing first, all of those covered. Increasing mental health services, increasing substance abuse treatment, phasing out shelters and focusing on families and youth. And I think every one of these is important and needed, but these are all long-term, complex, system-wide things that no one's going to be able to address in 90 days to 6 months. So the next slide is about short-term. And before I even say the first one, all I'm going to say is I hope everybody took the time to read the entire report that our chairman sent out along with the comments, because they're really telling about people's stories and challenges they're facing. And the comments come from people who are experiencing homelessness as well as the community. So I think it's a really interesting read. But here are the suggestions for short-term as I aggregated them. So again, you have something else you want to add, we're going to invite you to add to this conversation. So the first one is to provide low-barrier night shelter. So this includes, what if I have a dog? What if I have an animal who is the only thing left that loves me? What about maintaining sobriety? Is that necessary? What if I'm a couple, right? And I'm not going to separate from my loved one. And what about removing that $10 fee that many of our shelters, our largest shelters, require? Because that's, of course, increasing our panhandling and all of those issues. So one of the suggestions to immediately do that is to provide more low barrier sheltering, specifically with those issues. The next one is to establish boutique shelters that are going to address specific populations. So single women only, women with children only, men with children only. A lot of times they can't find any shelter. There's nowhere for them other than one that I know. Women and men and children, young adults, LGBTQ, especially if they're young adults. What if they're adults? What if they're seniors? Clean shelters for people who are struggling with addiction and don't want to be around others who are using, people who are medically fragile, who are families with children with special needs, another really big issue, and of course our veterans. So I think we've had this topic of giant shelters scare neighborhoods, nobody wants them, but if you open a 10-bed facility for just this boutique item or that boutique item, I think that you can have a conversation in the community that's much more about compassion and service than it is about we're going to flood the schools and the traffic and the streets and everything else. The next one is about opening our empty city buildings and garages for homeless. I think we all saw how incredibly fast and effectively our city responded to Hurricane Harvey evacuees, right? In 3 days, we could shelter hundreds and hundreds of people in an empty space. We provide security, showers, bathroom, food, clothing, help connect them to other resources. And by the way, Hurricane Harvey is an emergency, but so is our own homeless population. The next one is asking shelters not to turn out homeless early in the morning. So I think Dr. Woody, you even mentioned UGM sending over busloads of people 5 in the morning, but what does that do except dump people onto our streets? So if they don't want to be part of your day program, they're just wandering, and then all of the population is waking up to walk their dog, to come to work, all the different things that happen, and suddenly you've got an issue that wouldn't be there if it didn't happen until 10 o'clock in the morning. Reserving beds for people who are homeless so they don't have to carry around all of their belongings all day long. So they have that peace and security of knowing they have a bed to go back to. I mean, imagine what that does for someone who's mentally fragile. Having a late check-in program for people who work so that they don't have to choose between having a job and having to line up at 2:30 over at Austin Street so they can get a bed. I think all of these things, are things that we can ask, and frankly, our city council can ask of our service providers, and if they're receiving $1 of city money, could be something that is negotiated. Opening a day shelter program with mental health services, job training, TV, speakers, social workers, places to secure benefits, and offering to pick up and drop off at shelter locations. If you are Dr. Woody, you might be going, hello, that's what I do. And you do that, and we're so appreciative of it. However, you only got a certain percentage, and I don't know what that percentage is, but we certainly heard from the library that there was a lot of people there, and all it takes is a walk around town, and there's a lot of people there, and that's just the downtown area, because if you walk up I-35 corridor, there's people at every corner. I'm in far north Dallas to live and work every corner now. So this is not just the downtown issue. Creating a foster or adopt program for faith communities and the homeless to connect. I think there's a role for the faith community that has been underutilized, and this is a tenet of the faith communities, almost every faith community's religion, and really if every single congregation adopted one person, we would not be here, and that would be all right by me. Publicly discourage panhandling and public feedings. Sam, you did a great job talking about that. I think there's a lot of people who talk about it. I would never, I'm sorry, my friends who hate this, I would never be opposed to saying this is what somebody wants to do, but there is a better way, and maybe they just need more of that message to know how they can express their kindness and their generosity in a way that is much more constructive. providing a secure outdoor sleeping location with toilet, shower, trash, transportation, and invitations for nonprofits to be on site. So a year ago, we were talking about Dignity Field. We were talking about a lot of different things. An outdoor sleeping location could be a parking garage. It could be an actual field. It's very much, I think, what you toured, a sanctioned encampment. But the whole idea is have those nonprofits invited to be there so that they can then connect them and move them out to stability. Providing FEMA trailers or tiny houses for the homeless. This was something that came up many times in the community engagement. I don't have much more to say about it. Adding bathroom showers, hand washing stations that can be accessed by the homeless. This would deal with sort of the hepatitis issue. This would deal with a huge sanitation problem downtown. I know that when my family went to the fair the other day, we walked past three large areas that had lots of poop. Okay, so establish, it was not dogs. Okay, establish a drying out facility for drunk high individuals that the Dallas Fire Department and the police department can take them there without arresting them, without taking them to Parkland, where they can be safe, but the community can also be safe, where they're not going to get a ticket, which will then damage their ability to secure housing or employment later. And then enforcement of quality of life issues. So when you go back to that slide and you see all those things, a lot of those things have ordinances, have reasons where you get a citation, but we don't necessarily enforce it. I personally am not for enforcing, people need to be able to sleep somewhere, right? So if we're providing a place for them to do it, and then they're sleeping in a place they shouldn't, I'm okay with enforcement. But when we have no place for someone to go, I think it's cruel to enforce it. And so what I'm saying is we need to have that and then enforce. So with all of that, this last one is just all of those ideas put on one slide so that we can look at it all at the same time. What I would like to do is hopefully ask you if you have other things to consider, and if we can...
Yep. Well, let me offer a couple thoughts on
Yes.
trying to organize these things. I think, and Dr. Woody and Sam may cringe when I say this, but it seems like a lot of the comments, a lot of suggestions were around changing or tweaking existing policies of the shelters. Times of day, reservation system, whether they provide storage, late night check-in, what day services are provided, is there transportation available. So it seems like evaluating the practices of existing service providers would address a good number of the concerns.
I'd say devil in the details, and if you change one little thing, you're going to see a huge ripple effect. And the bridge is just one of many, not even the largest, frankly. And so, yeah, if you change to have a reservation system and storage in a later time, I mean, what that would do for the central business district area is huge.
Right, and of course, the bridge, they're represented here, that's why I'm picking on them, but they do have policies and procedures in place, and they consider all these issues, as have others. But I don't know, maybe they do, but I don't know how similar or different the policies of the various shelters are, and the extent to which they coordinate. There is some coordination, but if there's some sentiment for establishing a group to gather information on those types of policies and practices to determine whether whether we have some input on that, that would be a possible subcommittee. So rather than vote on taking action on that, let's talk about some other possibilities. And another one you mentioned was providing basic services. And we saw this in San Francisco in particular, where the city provided these mobile restrooms, and even shower facilities that were pretty high tech. After each shower, the entire facility was steam cleaned basically from jets that are inside the unit. And I see So I see Dr. Woody shaking his head. It's pretty impressive about, and these were not at shelters. These were located around the city where they'd be accessible to homeless folks when needed. And there were some in the plaza of City Hall, and there were some on street corners in the Tenderloin. They were just, I assume they had looked strategically at where those would be most beneficial. So providing access to basic services at locations other than shelters would be something I don't think Dallas does much of. And so if you talk to some homeless folks in the shelters and there's long lines to the bathrooms, the Starbucks and McDonald's don't want them using their facilities, and so they don't have anywhere to go. So that's just,
Well, they use the street.
right. Yeah, well,
They have no choice.
right. The redeployment of empty city-owned facilities is another idea that seems to have come up. I don't know that we have data, that the commission has data on how many facilities there are and where they're located, but we could gather that.
So a year ago, on that commission, there was the same sort of plea for urgent solutions, and the head of housing came up with a list. We formed a work group, and it was not acted on. And those properties are mostly not available anymore. But there's other properties.
Maybe others.
So again, it's just one of those things that, like, we are talking about things to death, and we're not doing anything to act. And I think if we if we pick 2 or 3 of these and we form work groups and we come back and say, hey, we've looked at, the 5 largest shelters and this is how they're running their policies, and we're going to go out to them and say, hey, Austin Street, if you keep your people until 10 in the morning, we know you're going to need additional staff, right? They let staff leaves at maybe 6 in the morning. So you're going to need this much, like, what do you need to make this happen? You probably need breakfast. They're giving out a bad breakfast, right? You probably need staff a little bit longer.
Can I?
Sure.
So I love this. Thank you very much. It's a huge help. One question. What do you have in mind when you say enforce quality of life issues? I mean, what would that look like?
Well, if you're defecating on the street, you're going to get a ticket. If you are drugged out on the streets, you would maybe be arrested for possession. I know there's a big thing about possession and citations for that. But, if you go back to the reasons, if you're littering, I mean, that could be you and me. If you're harassing people, right? So if you look at that list.
Just a little story. I met somebody in a totally different, who happened to be on another commission, and they were joking that the way that the city of Dallas is getting people to pay their traffic fines is by recruiting them to be on commissions, because you have to get your traffic fine. The point being, I'm not sure giving somebody a citation is going to deter them.
But if we do nothing, it's truly not
Well,
deterring.
there's enforcement of city ordinances and state laws for that matter.
I mean, I'm for the concept, it's just...
It's a double-edged sword, obviously. I mean, it may be that we want to look at laws that tend to impact the homeless and their enforcement, and both from ensuring quality of life for homeless and other residents, but also being sure that we're not criminalizing homelessness. So we would want to look at enforcement, lax enforcement, as well as potential over-enforcement. So I don't think we should look at one side of that in isolation.
Yeah, and just another in the category of other suggestions. So for instance, there's a DFW Faith Health Collaborative that is driven by the healthcare systems, which have a big stake in this. You're talking about hepatitis A. So that's I would add engaging health systems. In the interest of full disclosure, I worked for one.
But if we wanted to pursue that, then maybe our work group would say, well, how would we fund having additional restrooms and wash stations and showers? And frankly, you're right, the hospitals are a great one. They give out millions of dollars in charitable care that comes right off their bottom line. And
Community health.
Hepatitis A is very much about cleanliness and bathrooms.
Right. So I just put the healthcare providers systems, I guess is a better word, on the list as a short-term thing, because I know for a fact that everyone is looking at, I mean, this is one segment, but it happens to be a segment of high unreimbursed care, where there's lots of motivation to engage.
Yeah, and you're actually in a unique position by representing a healthcare provider and you're a member of a faith community.
Right, I hope I'm not violating any.
No, I think that's a great benefit to it.
I'm just, yeah.
So one of the comments that came up in Kara's presentation was engagement of faith communities, and so you probably do have a better feel than certainly I do, or maybe other commissioners, on the extent to which faith communities are organized or engaged.
It's pretty amazing. I had a conversation with the executive director of a wonderful nonprofit in our district. And he said, you know, he was talking about the value of establishing home gardens. I mean, neighborhood gardens. And he said, you know, we've got more food than we can do anything with here at this. It's not the producing food avenue, it's creating community. And what I love about a lot of the conversation I've heard is that it seems like there's a consensus here to look at solutions in light of how they work and what might work, and rather than, you know, looking at it moralistically, or, you know, just asking the simple question, will this work? And I'm all for that. But I do believe inside the faith community, there are tremendous resources there, and tons of dollars that are spent that are not efficiently spent. So education, collaboration. Sorry, let's just move on.
No, that's good. So let's try to, we have more ideas, and then we'll try to see if we can develop some consensus around this, a few issues to appoint some subcommittees.
I just wanted to add, you know, when we talked about, see, I'm familiar with the Bay Area, I'm familiar with California, from Sacramento to San Diego. So, you know, the math thing, in Long Beach, let me just start right there. In Long Beach, they have this facility that on one side, there's about 20 showers for the women, and on this side, there's 20 showers. There's just this facility like this for 20 showers for the men, and then they have volunteers that distribute the towels and give them the soap, and they can blow dry their hair and do whatever they need to do. And then they have a caseworker in there that has access to all the resources, so if they want to sit there and get on a list or get a reference to go over here to try to rent an apartment or a room or something, it's all of this one little spot where they can shower freely, and it's clean every, you know, when it gets slow, and what they do is they go in there and sanitize it, so when more people come, it's clean. But this is just a facility in Long Beach, and it's like, the way they got it is kind of neat because it's got parking, or you can get off the bus and walk to it. But you can go in there, you can change your clothes, take a shower, get on a computer, you know, and then they shut it down around 6 o'clock at night, but it reopens at 6 in the morning because there are people that truckers that are coming through that need to shower and get back up on the road. But this facility, it works. It's just, you know, the showers, if they have maybe several throughout Dallas or maybe 2 in the downtown area, but they've got to be built because they have the one side for men and the one side for women, and then they have chairs, you know, where they can sit and flip through the newspaper, do whatever, you know what I'm saying? But at least they're getting clean, they're using clean towels, and that would eliminate a lot of what you're talking about.
So it sounds like we're starting to develop some consensus that there might be some usefulness to have a subcommittee to study the issue of providing services that are other than in the shelter environment, basic services, scattered services. Does that make some sense?
Well, I mean, it goes hand in hand with the homeless, because the homeless come out of the shelter, they go take their shower, or they go to the library, and they get on the computer or do some computer skills training or whatever. But there are those homeless that go to bathe and clean up, you know, and those are the ones that are just chronically homeless, that this will provide a way for them to wash their behind.
May I comment? Okay. So I agree, there should be some sort of station, you know, where people can address their hygiene needs. As someone that, I live with, you know, one shelter 5 blocks north, another shelter 4 blocks south, another one 3 blocks east, and another one about 2 blocks west. And it seems that there would be plenty of opportunity to find a bathroom. However, or a shower, rather, all of these facilities do have showers. To add an area, a resource of, you know, where someone could come off randomly the street and address hygiene needs, where would that go? I mean, you'd think it would go to where it's accessible for homeless persons. However, there's 4 areas right now for me, for persons that are homeless in my neighborhood boundaries rather. And where would these hygiene facilities go? That would be the question. And I can tell you that there would be a lot of pushback for something like that in a neighborhood such as mine, where it would be technically accessible to a homeless person, but is it the right thing for that neighborhood considering the options?
Okay, maybe not a neighborhood, let's say, you know, where the warehouses are, there's plenty of room that can be converted. You understand what I'm saying? Use what you have. The cities, not just Dallas, but cities, they're not using what they have. You know, they want to do all this other. If we find the right building with this, that, it can be converted. You can save so much money with just rehabbing a building to meet the needs of this situation that has been going
So
on.
I think this is actually the committee work, and I would hate for us at, 5:30 to start getting into committee work. No, that's all right, but I'm just wondering, I actually think with over 200 encampments, finding a secure place for people to be able to sleep is a priority, and whether that's a garage so that if I am sleeping in my car with my children, I can park my car in that garage, or I'm a tent sleeper, I can be up on the top. But there's security, there's porta potties, there's trash, and then maybe on the first floor there's a place for nonprofits to go and I can go walk down and have a conversation. But I think having that kind of situation, which we know the city can do very quickly, is a recommendation I'm interested in pursuing if you would like me to help lead something like that.
Yes, and so to get to your point, I mean, these insider services and facilities could be located in connection with encampments, and not in the neighborhoods where there are shelters. So those are the types of issues that would be addressed.
Well, and
So-
you're talking about a building for showers, you're talking about if there was a mobile unit, but the truth is, and I'm not gonna pick on the bridge because you're right here, but Austin Street's not, so, but they've got showers that aren't used for like 12 hours a day. So what would it take for us to just make that available?
So,
And it doesn't cost hardly anything.
So what I've got on my list so far, and we have others, but review of existing shelter policies, redeployment of existing city-owned facilities, provision of hygiene and other basic services by the city in circumstances and locations where they're not currently providing that, which may include encampments. Engagement of faith communities and healthcare systems, we'll have to think about that in terms of our task of providing policy recommendations to the city. So it's a worthwhile endeavor, certainly, but think about whether that's within the scope of what our commission should be doing. There may be aspects of that are.
Yeah.
From that perspective as well.
If I could just throw in one other, because I think we're talking all around it, but what if we stepped back from, I mean, there's lots of low-hanging fruit. I hear you say there's lots of stuff that we could do that might have an appreciable influence. But if we step back a little bit, can we build an engine, an incubator? Can the work of this group make, we heard today a lot of testimony about how hard it is to do, for people to do things. And is it possible for us to think, how would we build an incubator for idea generation and implementation that would make it easier? Because some of these things are not going to work, or they'll have unintended consequences. And I don't hear you getting tied to those, but how are we going to develop a process that keeps that idea?
So can I just say something? I hear you. I think that's a longer term thing, and I think we're going to talk longer term solutions at the next. But I have to say that if we try something and it doesn't work, I still think the community is going to shout hooray because we've done something, and this community has done nothing for a decade. And there are so many reports, they all say the same thing. And, some of this is just common sense, and it's just little tweaks. And I think that we could get support from our shelter providers. I think we can get support from other parts of the city. I think there's a lot of things that could happen that are just so small that would make all the difference. And again, if it doesn't work, so let's stop doing it and we'll do something else.
So in the interest of time at this point, can I please bring forward a motion, whichever, to establish a subcommittee of this commission to investigate near-term, rapidly implementable programs leveraging existing and easily accessible resources. What's the study?
Yes, we want to break that down into use of facilities versus provision of additional services. Or when you volunteered to head a subcommittee, you want to state that you think that.
I'll do it either way. I'm just going to say that.
Okay.
So one of the things that we had talked about is what if we took the different ideas and made them different work groups? But if you want to lump them together, we can do that too and say, here's our most.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Kriesman. Will you please state the motion?
Yeah, to establish a subcommittee to investigate near-term implementable solutions leveraging existing assets.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
And I'll just add a comment that I'm happy to split that into two things later. We'll see what comes back and what we find boots the ground.
Okay, so we need
He wants to be on this, yeah.
I'm happy to do that.
okay, Mr. Cruz, Ms. Minson, Grace, others? Okay, so.
Were you on? I thought you were.
Yes.
All right, so we have 4 volunteers. We need a motion to establish this committee of 4 with Commissioners Grace, Kulak, Minson, and Cruz. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, this motion is passed. Thank you. We have one more item before we break. Part of our charter, a big part of our charter is to solicit input from the community. So I believe we need to consider having a public comment period at future meetings. And we can develop procedures, specific procedures for how that will work, working with the staff. But I think we ought to determine today the basics of that, how many speakers we want to allow, for example, maximum of 5 speakers to give them up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes per presentation. So we have discussion on that.
I would suggest two things. One, I would be inclined to assume it would be better at the front of the meeting, but I certainly know staff's input on when would be the most, based on work with other commissions in the past, when would be the most efficacious time. I know people, you get off work, I mean, given the timing of our meetings to the beginning and the end, I'd love to hear staff recommendations on that. And the other thing I was going to say is, even if we do limit it to a certain number of people, I think it'd be good to prioritize if anyone experiencing homelessness or past experience comes in. So even if it requires us to breach another limit we have, let's say 5 speakers total, we could be more flexible with that to allow them, we have that opportunity.
Okay,
First,
we can specify that as a priority as well. We don't have to have
Maybe at your
first come,
discretion.
first served. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yes.
So you're saying that you would prioritize a speaker based on if they were homeless or not?
I was saying just a hard and fast limitation number of speakers is good for making sure meetings continue, but if we have an opportunity to get that kind of feedback from someone who's had that kind of experience, we wouldn't necessarily limit ourselves. And I'm happy to share discretion, I just want
It wouldn't have to be a hard and fast priority, but we could have it as a factor that if we have the opportunity to have someone who's experienced or is experiencing homelessness be a speaker or some of these speakers at a meeting.
Based on, I would say based on our high degree of interest in at the very least, bottom line, how to get that population's cooperation for whatever we're doing.
Meaning, would they come out to speak, sign up to speak? Is that what you're saying?
All I'm saying is that someone homeless shows up and has something to say, I'd be highly interested. And just from a point of view of...
We have a very large turnout, and if you're interested in getting specific input, there's other meetings where they go specifically to do that. But I will tell you that in the hall before I came out here, a gentleman who's homeless said he's going to get 30 people to come to every one of our meetings. So, I think there should be a limit. I think you should have flexibility on whether you extend that number, because otherwise, we're already here until 5:45.
Yes, we have a very full agenda today.
I was just going to add for context because Mr. Cruz had mentioned, preference on before, early versus the end. And so it definitely is up to you all. Just to use the model of city council meetings, they have morning speakers and afternoon speakers. So that could be, if you wanted to limit how many, that you have 2 opportunities, so that folks don't have to stay through the whole meeting to listen, to be able to speak. So it could go either way, but of course, there will be a sign-up process, so it will be in the order of sign-up. Council also requires that you can't sign up to speak again within a 30-day period. So if you spoke today, then you have 30 days from now before you get on the agenda again. And so that way, if you are someone that regularly comes and speaks, and that's the day that you want us to make an exception, well, if it's within 30 days, then you wouldn't be one of the ones that an exception is made for. But that, again, would go along with whatever you want your policy to be. So that's just some context about how city council operates.
Okay, so we have an existing model that might work tentatively for us, so we can have a motion that gets into the specifics on how this would operate, or we can delegate it to someone, or we can establish it for the next meeting, tweak it for future meetings if necessary. So, someone have to make a motion, following either.
You want the responsibility? Okay, I'd like to move that our chair, Mr. Webb, work with staff to come up with a proposal for our next meeting as the specifics of how that works.
So, point of clarification, so you would delegate authority to implement that procedure for our next meeting?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, please don't misunderstand me, I want to hear the voice of the people. But for the sake of time, is there any other outlets that could be made available?
Yes, there is a strong sentiment for ability of the public to speak at our meetings, but in public engagement of the citizenry more broadly is a topic that we can also discuss. At the last commission, as we've just seen from Kara's presentation, did some charrettes and some public meetings and had questionnaires, so it may be that at some point we want to have a subcommittee to establish procedures for soliciting additional input from the citizens. It may be that we have one representative from each city council district. It can be done on a district by district basis or a broader basis or some combination of that, but absolutely, so this is a specific way to allow input at the meetings, but I do think we need to longer term think about additional ways to solicit input from our citizens. We vote on that motion? No. All in favor of the motion to delegate to the chair the authority to establish and implement procedures for allowing public speakers at our meetings, beginning with our November meeting, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.